Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by Five Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts line setter Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC on Fox 11 event, which takes place in Orlando, Florida. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the show. Normally, fight scientist Reed Kuhn steps in and offers his expansive numerical insight on all fights with sufficient data, but Reed is welcoming a new addition to the family and he's a little preoccupied, so he'll be MIA for this episode and hopefully rejoining us next week. Briefly looking back at the last event, our premium bets for the Ultimate Fighter Nations finale went 1-1 to lose 2.2 units. We won our bet on Elias Theodoro, but our play on Kyle Note came up short. Also, our free bet, a two-team parlay of the over 2.5 rounds totals in the Kaufman-Smith and Noon Stout bouts were killed when Noon scored an unexpected knockout 30 seconds into the fight to stop Stout for the first time via strikes in his career. Now back to the present, UFC on Fox 11 features a whopping 13-fight card in total and will be aired on Fox Sports 1 as well as the main Fox network this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary portion of the card is a heavyweight contest featuring Derek Lewis, who is 9-2 with 1 no contest, and he's taken on Jack May, who is 7-0. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened Lewis minus 315 to come back on May, plus 235. And at the time of the recording at 5 dimes, it's actually holding steady. So no real movement. That means they're probably not getting a ton of action on this fight. Kind of a tricky fight to bet on, especially at where the line is right now. You have 2 UFC debuting heavyweights, and these guys are definitely strong. They're definitely big guys, and they definitely have a ton of knockout power between them, no doubt about it. Getting right into the fight, though, Lewis is a little bit of the more well-rounded fighter. I think, he's a favorite for a reason. Obviously, he's coming in 3-1. He's strong. He's aggressive. He's got this kind of brawling style. He tends to be a little bit technical, but again, kind of gets wild at times, so it makes things into a brawl, and that's exactly his fight because the guy's so tough. He doesn't mind that at all. He does, like I said, swing real heavy, even with his feet. I mean, he throws powerful kicks in the mix as well. So that is pretty good to see a heavyweight that size actually be that fluent in his movement on the feet. Doesn't have a ton of speed, but he still manages somehow to scramble a lot of bad spots, to maintain position, to get in control of the fight more times than not as well. So it is pretty impressive. He's pretty athletic. He does have okay wrestling. Again, and I pointed out he does have kind of fantastic scrambling ability for a guy his size. But I think his best attribute is his toughness. I mean, the guy looks like he's fading as the fight goes on, but more times than not, it's just he does slow down a bit, but he can keep going 3 strong rounds. So he's never out of the fight. He has several late stoppages as well. So Lewis, a very hard fighter to stop, and he's going to bring it for sure. Now, on the other hand, he's fighting May. He is making, again, his UFC debut here. May is more of he's a giant, first of all. The guy's 6'8", so he's going to have that reach advantage over him as far as height goes, over Lewis. And he's also more of a kickboxing style fighter. I mean, he's got devastating hands. He's got some speed on his feet, so he's going to have the speed advantage over Lewis as well. He's athletic. I mean, he's a very talented striker, but the problem with May is he does tend to fade as the fight goes on. His cardio is very suspect, and if he doesn't get the job done early, I think Lewis is going to be there to knock him out as the fight goes on, because against Lewis, with a guy with that much power and you start to fade, it's not a very good combination. So May, I think he's going to have the hand speed, he's going to have a little bit better boxing, and he's going to be dangerous, no doubt about it, because the guy, like I said, 6'8", very powerful in his own right. Offensively, he's very solid on the feet overall, but defensively, he does tend to get tagged a little bit. But he does have some nasty knees, I should mention that as well, from the clinch. And his ground game is a little bit questionable still. Now, he is training with the decent camp, CSW, that's with Josh Barnett and Eric Paulson and crew, so he does have experience on the ground, but I still give the edge on the ground to Lewis. Lewis can get top control. He dishes out some nasty ground and pound. And like I said, with May, with his ability and the way he tends to fade, I think Lewis is kind of a bad matchup for him. So definitely two heavy-handed sluggers, and that's what we're going to see in this fight. But I got to give the edge to Lewis, and I'm going to go that way.
Yeah, and being on Lewis's side just makes more sense because, honestly, he's the more well-rounded fighter of the two. Age shouldn't be too much of a factor. Lewis is 29, May's 33. Lewis, the biggest difference here, honestly, is the strength of schedule. Lewis has faced just significantly tougher fighters throughout the course of his career. His two losses are to, a pretty good Bellator heavyweight, to Tony Johnson, and then to UFC heavyweight Sean Jordan, and he actually beat Jared Rosholt in one of his fights, and Lewis is currently the legacy heavyweight champion. So he's got great experience, good strength of schedule, and there's a great quote that Lewis said was, May is not my toughest fight, but I know I'm his. And it's true. May has faced a bunch of cans so far throughout his MMA career. And honestly, in kickboxing, he was good, not great. I mean, he had a fight in kickboxing where he gassed after one round, actually less than one round, and it ended up getting him in big trouble. So I think that's going to be a really big problem here, is the fact that Lewis has already shown that he can take somebody's best shot, like the Jared Rosholt fight, and then come back and just completely take over later in the fight. And that is May's biggest weakness. Now, as Nick mentioned, May trains with Josh Barnett and Eric Paulson, but none of those ground skills really translate over to his skill set. The biggest thing I think that those guys have helped him with is takedown defense. He's pretty good at that. He can use that wrestling knowledge to keep the fight standing and work his kickboxing, because he does present some problems in the kickboxing realm just because of his size, as long as he uses his reach properly. Now, I expect Lewis to eat some shots early, but I do not think he'll get stopped. I think that he'll just keep coming forward. He's, as Nick mentioned again, he's tough as nails, and he'll take one to eat to give one out. And I think eventually that's just going to overwhelm May here. So my pick is Lewis as well. So moving on, we have a fascinating featherweight prospect matchup between Mirsad Bektic, who's 7-0, taking on Chaz Skelly, who is 11-0. So Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Man, it really is a great fight. I opened up Skelly minus 175, the comeback on Bektic plus 135. Since that time, action on Bektic has dropped the line 5 times right now, has Skelly at minus 140, Bektic even money. So support coming in on Bektic, and like you said, it's going to be a classic battle. Two definitely prospects, at the featherweight weight class, no doubt about it. So I've been looking forward to these guys making their UFC debut for a long time, and it's amazing that they got matched up together. So this is going to be a barn burner for sure. It's even a tough one for me to pick, honestly, because both these guys have kind of a similar skill set. Both of them have outstanding grappling, and that's what they try to utilize the most. Let's start off with Bektic, though. He's a little bit more well-rounded in this spot. That's why I think a few more people are coming in that way early on, because I think that Bektic, he does have, again, that wrestling base like I was talking about. He trains out of American Top Team, so he's got a good camp behind him, and he just continues to improve fight by fight. So his striking is what I think is going to set him apart from Skelly. He's got a big advantage on the feet. He likes to push forward. He mixes things up well. He's got a ton of power in his hands, and he's got some nasty knees from the clinch as well. So Bektic on the feet is no joke, a ton of power. But again, a lot of times he does utilize his striking and puts the fight on the mat, has a solid ground and pound, really good takedowns at wrestling, good submissions as well. So Bektic, an all-around complete fighter. That's why, again, he's a serious prospect in this spot. Now, against Skelly, if any edge at all, he probably will have a slight edge in wrestling, especially early on. Now, his striking, it's a little bit not up to par as far as against Bektic, a fighter like Bektic, but Skelly's striking is definitely improving. He's fighting out of a good camp as well, team takedown. So Johnny Hendricks and crew over there, he's going to get nothing but better and better. But, of course, team takedown is a bunch of wrestlers that excel at what they do, so that's exactly what Skelly likes to do the most. He really comes after it. He's an aggressive grappler. More times than not, he gets the fight to the floor. He manages to control. He has good ground and pound, and looks for submissions. He has an outstanding submission game as well. Now, Skelly, even from his back, he has been put on his back before, and even from the back, he definitely looks for arm bars, transitions out of bad spots well, and manages to get on top. So for me, this is a fight that goes back and forth because I really do think it's going to turn into a grappling battle. And I think you got to slightly favor Skelly in this spot because he can kind of neutralize Bektic and put him in some bad spots, I think, early on, maybe clinch up against the cage and, again, maybe get a few more takedowns than Bektic does. So I'm slightly leaning towards Skelly in this spot. I do think that he has to be careful, though, because as the fight goes on, Skelly does have a tendency to fade a little bit more than Bektic. So in round 3, it could get really interesting. But, well, the whole fight's going to be competitive for sure. But I'm saying as the fight goes on, Bektic could start taking over and taking control a little bit more. But by that time, I think it's going to be a little bit too late. I think Skelly's probably going to do enough to control the first 2 rounds and squeak by a decision. I could be very wrong here. It's a very difficult fight to call because both these guys, again, are outstanding prospects. I'm really looking forward to this fight, but my slight lean is going to be on Skelly here.
Yeah, and this will be the first time, potentially of many, that I disagree with you, Nick. I really do like Mirsad Bektic. Initially, when I was doing my research, Skelly, came off the board. I'm like, wow, the guy beat Daniel Pineda twice early in his career. He was supposed to fight for the World Series of Fighting featherweight title earlier this year against Karakanyan. This guy's getting pushed to the moon, and he's one of the undefeated prospects at a team takedown. I was just completely enthralled. But then the more I delved into Bektic, the more I liked him. He is so well-rounded on the feet. He's just a dynamo. He's got power in his hooks. He's got good kicks. He's got good knees. He's got good elbows. And as Nick mentioned, on the ground, he's just fantastic. He finishes a lot of fights with ground and pound. Like his last opponent just stood no chance. The guy pulled guard and Bektic just picked him up, carried him over to his corner, and just started beating on him in front of his corner so he could get advice on how to beat him up faster. I mean, the guy is just amazing to watch. And I think that's the biggest difference here is the well-roundedness. I will give Skelly a slight wrestling edge, not a big one. He wasn't like an All-American at a big school or anything out of college, but he does use his wrestling very well, smothering top control. He doesn't give up position often. So I would not be surprised to see Skelly come out real hard here and maybe take the first round, but I think Bektic just overwhelms him a little bit with his overall game. On the feet, Bektic completely crushes Skelly. Skelly is, still rudimentary in the stand-up. I think you sugarcoated it earlier. The guy just is not a very good stand-up fighter. He is a ground fighter, and he is a good ground fighter, but he is almost entirely a ground fighter, so he needs to get this fight to the canvas. And I think Bektic is good enough to avoid it long enough to potentially get a stoppage or at least a decision here. Skelly is solid, though. I mean, the guy gets people down. They stay down. He has pretty good ground and pound, pretty good submissions. They're not amazing, but he more than does enough usually to win his fights and eventually stop his opponents. But I think Bektic is just a killer. There's a difference here between Skelly, who's a really good prospect, and then Bektic, who I think is just a phenomenal prospect. I think this is a guy you're going to be talking about in a year or two from now, how good he is. He's going to be making some waves. So my pick's Mirsad Bektic, and I think it's a shame that these guys got matched up together in their UFC debuts because I think they're both very good. So moving on, though, we have another really good prospect making his UFC debut as Ray Borg, undefeated, just fought 2 weeks ago, 6-0 overall, taking on Dustin Ortiz, who is 12-3, and this is a flyweight bout. So, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things already?
I opened Ortiz minus 215, the comeback on Borg plus 165. And the line climbing a little bit. It's Dustin Ortiz minus 245 and Borg plus 175 right now. I'm kind of glad to see a little bit of the movement on Ortiz. I'm not really surprised because, Ortiz has been one of these guys. He came into the UFC under the radar a little bit. He didn't get too much respect, but the guy has definitely proven that he belongs towards the top of the flyweight division. His last fight with Moraga, he won that fight. And most people's viewpoints, the judges got it wrong there. And that's against a guy that just fought for the title in Moraga. So that tells you how good Ortiz really is. He's got a well-rounded skill set. The guy definitely has some good striking. It's getting better. Training with Duke Rufus and crew, of course it's going to get better, no doubt about that. But you know what? The most impressive thing about Ortiz is, how he puts everything together. The guy transitions well from his striking into his grappling, gets takedowns, has a good submission game, has good ground and pound. Again, transitions well. So Ortiz is a very, very complete fighter. So a tough spot for Borg to actually make his UFC debut in. But I think Borg's going to be okay. I know he's kind of an unknown out there to most people, but Borg is coming into the UFC. He's fought on Access TV, of course, recently, like Brian just mentioned a little while ago. And Borg is just a little spark plug, man. I mean, the guy is definitely a well-rounded prospect. He's still young. He's only 20 years old, I believe. So the sky's really the limit for this kid. He is a relentless grappler. I mean, he's extremely well-rounded, like I said, but his best attribute to me, he's got great wrestling, great Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He transitions very well, and his speed is incredible. I mean, the guy's lightning fast. He can be put on his back, but when you do get him on his back, you can't keep him there. I mean, he manages to transition out very well and manages to end up getting in a great position to put himself in position to do some nasty ground and pound. So he does have that going for him as well. Striking on the feet, he's very fast again and explosive. He throws really nice kicks. The only thing on his feet sometimes, for me, that I find a problem with is that he does tend to be a little bit inactive at times, looks to counter maybe a little bit more, or looks to find his spots and then explodes in. So I wish he was just a little bit more busy on the feet. But, I mean, the guy is definitely good in all areas. I mean, his grappling, again, is relentless, and he just has some nasty ground and pound and a great submission game to go along with it. So Borg is a very complete fighter. He's going to give, even though he's coming into this fight, as the new UFC debuting prospect against a very solid, proven Ortiz, he's going to give Ortiz all he can handle. I'm expecting this fight to probably hit the cards, and if it does, I think Borg's going to actually, with his wrestling and with his relentless style, I think he's going to be able to pull off the decision here. So I'm actually going to pick Borg making his UFC debut. A little hard, but at the same time, I think he is going to come through because kid's something special for sure, and I think he's only going to get better from here. So a big win for Borg if he does get this win in his UFC debut.
Yeah, and I'm going to sound crazy for agreeing with you, but I do. The more I looked into Ray Borg, the more I liked him. The kid is just absolutely fantastic to watch. He's a solid wrestler, great sweeps, great transitions, excellent submission ability, and great scrambling. So everything about him on the ground is just insane. So I do expect Ortiz to put him on his back at some point, just because Ortiz is a very good wrestler as well, but there's just no way he keeps him there. Either Borg is going to put him in a submission, Borg is going to sweep him, or Borg is just going to scramble back to his feet. But I expect a lot of ground scrambles in this fight. It's going to be a high-paced, high-action fight. Ray Borg is a cardio machine, and the guy just fought 2 weeks ago. But honestly, it was a fight between him and Nick Urso, and Nick Urso was a really good bantamweight prospect out of Greg Jackson's gym, and he just annihilated him. Like, he beat Urso so badly that he hardly wasted any energy. It was basically a glorified sparring match. And so I don't think that there's going to be any ill effects from that fight because he took no damage. And again, Borg is so good. His single leg takedown is outstanding. The guy just gets a hold of your leg, turns the corner, and you're on your back. And he just wears people down to the point where they don't want to fight him anymore. So I think he's extremely opportunistic. He'll keep the fight close quarters on the ground, not taking a ton of risks at first, and then the second he sees an opening, he's going to go for a submission, or he's going to posture up and drop big elbows or big ground and pound. So I really do like this kid. Now, Ortiz, he's actually gained some respect from me with his UFC performances so far, especially that last fight against John Moraga where he used his offensive wrestling very well. Granted, he lost the stand-up portion of that fight, but in terms of wrestling, he put Moraga on his back repeatedly, and I thought that he did enough to win that fight, and that's coming from a guy that bet Moraga in that fight. So I do think that Ortiz is a little underrated, but again, this is a case where I just think he's coming in there against an unknown commodity in Borg, and I'm not sure he's going to be ready for him. So this is a really, really interesting situation. And on the feet, it should be relatively even, although Borg is really flashy. He'll throw all kinds of crazy spinning stuff. I don't know how much of it's going to land. I really don't expect him to do a lot of damage on the feet. But the good thing here is Ortiz is not a good stand-up fighter whatsoever either. So I think that the fact that Borg is so good at transitioning from the stand-up to the ground, I think that's going to help him a lot. So I'm going to go with Borg as well. I think this is going to be competitive. I think Ortiz is going to, give him a run for his money. But Ray Borg just beat one of the best bantamweight prospects that wasn't signed to the UFC in his last fight, and I think he could beat a UFC level fighter here. So moving on, we have a really interesting battle in the welterweight division in Jordan Meehan, who is 27-9, taking on Hernani Perpetuo, who is 17-3 with 1 no contest. So Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Meehan minus 385 to come back on Perpetuo plus 265, and looking over 5 dimes right now, it's Meehan minus 400 to come back on Perpetuo plus 325. So a little bit of movement in Meehan's favor, but not much. I think that's probably more parlay action, and we should probably see the line increase a little bit more from here as well. But getting right into the fight, I know Meehan's coming off that surprising loss to most people against Matt Browne, and myself included. I thought Meehan was going to win that fight, but all credit to Browne. I mean, the guy's been on an extreme roll, so nothing even too bad with that loss now. It's just, like I said, a little bit surprising. And Meehan has been out for a year or so that's a little bit of caution there, I think, that we should all take. But Meehan is simply the better fighter. I mean, his aggressiveness on the feet, his precision striking, his takedown defense, his grappling, every area in this fight, Meehan's going to have an advantage. So I think he is going to get some momentum back, and he's a tough out, make no doubt about it, to most people in the welterweight division. So to make your debut, which Perpetuo is in the UFC, against a guy like Meehan is not an easy task by any means, but getting into Perpetuo, because most of you guys probably are a little bit more unfamiliar with him. He is a former Shudo world champion, so he's got that going for him. He does have that prospect buzz around him. His striking's okay. I mean, that's the best attribute in his game, I think. He's an orthodox striker. He likes to fight behind a very solid lead jab. He throws some powerful counter hooks with both hands, so he's got that going for him as well. But what I notice about him, he does, against aggressive fighters, and Meehan is a very aggressive fighter, he tends to backpedal a little bit and let the aggressive fighters push the pace on him. And he can't really do that to Meehan, because Meehan's going to take advantage of that and possibly put him out. So he's got to look to counter and be effective and maybe push the pace back towards Meehan, and that's just simply not his style. Now, Perpetuo does have some solid grappling. He's capable of finishing the fight by sub as well. But his wrestling's okay, but it's just not that great. So I think that Meehan has been in there, obviously, with better wrestlers and throughout his career, so he should be able to maintain the fight up. And if he does, his aggressiveness and, again, the way he pushes forward should win him this fight. Again, very hard spot for Perpetuo to come in here against Meehan and make his UFC debut successful. So if he does win this fight, I will be very surprised. But, again, that's why I opened him so high. I do think Meehan's going to roll in this fight. It probably is going to be a stoppage. I'll be surprised if he doesn't finish him, or, like I said, if Perpetuo somehow can get the win, his stock's going to be ridiculously high, and he's going to really be considered a very, very serious prospect from then on. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think Meehan is going to get the win, and probably by stoppage.
And I completely agree on this one. Meehan is just so good. I'll start with Meehan just because I think that Perpetuo is the similar fighter to Meehan, just not as good in almost every area. So Meehan has incredible combinations. He uses elbows perhaps better than any fighter I've ever seen in the stand-up department. He has a really strong left jab, and he is crazy accurate. He is a precision fighter. He has spectacular killer instinct. When he has somebody hurt, and he knows he can finish him, he just goes pedal to the metal. When he doesn't, he stays up, lets off the gas, lets him back to the feet like in the Dan Miller fight, and then just goes right back to tearing him down. So he is just so lethal. He switches stance as well, so he's very dangerous with both hands, can use both styles to make a tougher matchup depending on who he's fighting. He mixes to the head and body well while in flurries, so if he starts teeing off on somebody to the head and they're hurt, he will immediately drop down to the body if they start covering up, like in the Matt Browne fight that actually got him a knockdown. So the guy is just so incredibly fun to watch. Now, in terms of things that can go wrong with him, I think due to how powerful and efficient and technical he is, he does have a little bit of trouble sometimes when somebody drags him into a brawl like Matt Browne did, and it just puts a ton of pressure on him. He did wilt a little bit there. And he has had trouble in the past against really good wrestlers like Tyron Woodley. But again, I don't think Perpetuo is a huge pressure-based fighter, and I definitely don't think he's a great wrestler. So I think he's going to be really safe here. Now, Perpetuo, he's basically Jordan Meehan light. He's a good stand-up fighter. is not nearly as technical. He's a little more brawler-centric. He throws with a lot more bad intentions with his initial shots. He doesn't put combinations together as well. And he does train out of Nova União, which is an incredible gym, and he is a highly rated prospect. He's one of the better welterweights to come out of Brazil since Eric Silva, but I just don't see how he can threaten Jordan Meehan here unless he lands a huge haymaker that Meehan doesn't see coming. In terms of ground skills, something that would really help him here, Perpetuo is more of just a staller there. If he gets on top, he just tries to ride some time out. If he's on bottom, he just holds on and just hopes for a stand-up, those type of situations. He really doesn't have that much to offer on the ground unless he hurts his opponent first, then he can dive on a submission. So I think this is Jordan Meehan's fight to lose, and I'm definitely picking him here. So moving on, we have a middleweight contest featuring Chao Magalhães, who is 7-1 overall, taking on Luke Zachrich, UFC debuter, who is 13-2. So Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Magalhães minus 280, the comeback on Zachrich plus 200. Over $5 right now, it is minus 260 plus 220. So the line just basically got a little bit tighter. I don't think people are going crazy or looking forward to bet this fight, honestly. So I'm sure it's not going to get a ton of action compared to some of the other fights at the sports books, but it is what it is. I mean, it's an interesting matchup for sure. I mean, Zachrich, for those that don't know too much about him, I mean, he's a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter himself. He's just not great in any area, really. I mean, he does have some advantages in this fight, though. I should point those out right away. I think he does have a stand-up advantage. Magalhães' striking is getting a little better, but I think Zachrich puts things together, his combinations. He's more of a fluid striker, a little bit better, and he's got more of a knockout possibility in this fight. But Zachrich, more than anything else, he likes to try to work his ground game. He does have submissions on his resume, and he likes to look for the sub, get the takedowns, and again, look to finish kind of. He's got decent ground and pound, but again, he doesn't excel in any particular area. So he's just one of these guys that's okay. I hate to say it, but it's true. I mean, he's just okay in every area. Now, Magalhães does excel, of course. For once, I'm not going to get too crazy, I guess I should say, with Magalhães, because all of us know, I mean, he doesn't get a ton of respect. Magalhães' game isn't that fun to watch, and he's really not that good. He is improving. He had a huge win over Nick Ring in his last fight. I do see progression in his game, but that's why I'm not going to go too crazy and say Magalhães is going to be dominant in this fight. In fact, looking at the line and seeing Magalhães around minus 260 is very surprising, but he does have the edge in the grappling in this fight. He does have the edge as far as pushing the pace. He's going to be the fresher fighter. He's had more time to train for this fight as well. And, I think he is going to use that. His stand-up game, like I said, is not very effective, but he is getting a little bit better. He does have a little bit of power behind him. He's going to have more confidence coming into this fight than he ever has before, and I think he's going to do what he does best, which is kind of look to clinch up, put Zachrich against the cage, get some takedowns here and there. He has a better submission game than Zachrich as well. So I think really it's Magalhães' fight to win or lose here, and I think more times than not he's probably going to grind out a competitive type of decision here. But it's nothing you can be too confident about because really these are very similar fighters, and like I said, I actually think that Zachrich actually has a little bit of edge on the feet, so can't go crazy with it, but I do favor Magalhães in what should be a competitive, kind of boring type of fight.
Yeah, and I completely agree. This is not going to be a very pretty fight. I've actually seen Zachrich fight in person at a UVC event in Columbus about a year ago, and it was he's interesting to watch. The guy's 32 years old, trains at a Ronin training center in Columbus, one of his own gyms, and he actually runs a pizza franchise in Columbus. I mean, the guy isn't really a full-time fighter, but he does train consistently. And he has not had a full training camp for this fight because he is stepping in on short notice. So I think him and Magalhães are actually very similar style fighters. Neither guy is that great in any specific area, although Magalhães is relatively good on the ground. Zachrich is pretty good on the ground too, but I think Magalhães is just a little more fluid down there. And I think Magalhães does have the youth advantage here. At 26 years old compared to the Zachrich 32, I think he's got a lot more room for growth. Zachrich does have some decent experience against some pretty tough guys. He tried out for the Ultimate Fighter, lost in the elimination bout to get onto the show, and he has fought in Bellator. So I mean, he's fought in the bright lights a little bit throughout his career, But overall, Magalhães, this is his fourth fight in the UFC, and while I really don't think he's that good, I mean, I think at one point I said he was one of the worst fighters in the entire UFC roster, he's managed to stick around. He's got a 2-1 record now in the promotion, so hats off to him. But I do think that Magalhães probably has an advantage here, but he's gonna have to use his ground game, because, while Zakrich isn't a dynamo on the feet, he probably is a little bit better. Magalhães more wings, haymaker type punches. It's not pretty, but, neither guys have, devastating stand-up ability. So I really don't think Zakrich will be able to take too much advantage of his advantage there. And I think Magalhães probably grinds this out, maybe gets a submission. Zakrich has been prone to getting tapped out in the past. So my pick is Magalhães. Not a lot of confidence in it whatsoever. And moving on, we have a very interesting featherweight matchup. We have Esteban Payon, who is 14-5 overall with 1 no contest, taking on UFC newcomer Alex White, who is 9-0. So, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Payon minus 165 to come back on White plus 125. And again, another fight that hasn't had a ton of movement. It's minus 155 right now, 5 dimes, come back plus 135. Line just got a little bit tighter, and I think it's going to be, it probably won't move too much until maybe fight day a little bit. But it's going to be a competitive fight, no doubt about it. White is making his UFC debut, obviously, so there's a little bit of buzz and hype around him. He's another guy considered a prospect here. I just don't know how he's going to fare. I mean, he does have some pro boxing experience. He's fought amateur Muay Thai. He's been on the grappling circuit. So he's another one of these guys that's a pretty complete fighter. But he does have some flaws in all of those areas, too, if you look at it. I mean, he can be put on his back. In the stand-up game, his defense is what concerns me a little bit. He kind of keeps his hand low and wide at times, and he gets tagged. He's definitely susceptible to getting hit on the feet. He, I think, puts everything together okay, but against a guy like Payon, which is an extremely well-rounded veteran in his own right, I mean, he was well on his way to beating Robert Peralta in his last fight before he got caught in that third round. So, and he's fought against solid competition. And Payon's one of these guys that, throughout his career, has just gotten better and better. He's a very solid fighter. He's got, again, another, like I said, well-rounded skill set. The guy can stand up and bang. He's got good boxing on the feet. He has underrated wrestling, and he's got decent submissions. He don't use it a whole lot, but he does. He's capable of finishing the fight by sub. But more so than not, he looks for ground and pound. He's just a finisher. He looks to knock you out. So I think the edge goes to him because he's fought against better competition. White hasn't really beat anybody good, and he's not going to offer Payon anything that he hasn't already seen. So I do favor him. I mean, the odds are competitive and close for a reason because I am expecting a competitive fight. Payon has been fighting MMA for a long time, so he's not old. He's only 32 years old, but White is the fresher, younger fighter here. He does have a lot of knockout power, and again, he does have a well-rounded skill set. So based on the footage out there that you can see on White, he looks okay. I'm expecting him to look a little bit better than he does actually out there. I think that we will see a little bit more improvement from him. I should mention on the feet again, he is a southpaw too, so that throws a little bit of a different angle into his approach, and Payon has to adjust to that a little bit as well. And his power, Payon basically has to be definitely careful of that. His chin, again, is getting a little bit suspect, Payon's. But other than that, it's his fight to win or lose. I think he can dictate where the fight goes. I think he can be the more effective striker on the feet. And I think he could probably grind out White or even finish him as the fight goes. So you got to lean a little bit more towards Payon, but can't be a confident pick because White's a little bit too unknown for all of us, honestly. I mean, we've got to see what he can do against solid competition. But from everything that I have seen, he is a pretty complete fighter. So that's good to see another guy coming in at 145 that has some promise, but I do still think Payon comes through here in this spot.
Yeah, and I agree that Payon should win this fight. Initially I looked at it and I'm like, oh man, White 9-0, 25 years old. This guy could be, the next big thing. And then I started watching the tape and I'm like, okay, I kind of understand why Payon's the favorite now. White trains out of Missouri. I think Team Destruction, which I don't think has produced any UFC level fighters before. He's still very raw. As Nick mentioned, he does have really good power in both hands, and he can switch stances, but I'm just not sure how much that's going to translate because I'm not sure how he'll be able to hit Payon just because he's not that technical. He does have the experience in kickboxing and boxing, but I don't know who he was fighting because He did not look very good in terms of the stand-up ability in the fights I was watching. He even lost the first round of a couple. He has pretty basic submission skills, but I think that's at the lower level, the regional level, and I'm not sure they're going to work in the UFC. One thing he does have going for him is he has a very good chin, so he can take a lot of damage. So maybe Payon clips him a couple times and charges forward and leaves an opening for White to land a counter on the way in when Payon's defenses are down. But other than that, I really think that White has some subpar takedown defense, and he can get outworked on the feet. Payon, he's just pretty well-rounded in general. 32 years old, trains out of Arizona Combat Sports. He works a good lead jab, has pretty good conditioning. He works some decent top control. His wrestling is a little bit above average, which should be more than enough to put White down. He works the clinch well. And again, the thing that I'm most concerned about in this fight, as Nick mentioned, is he does not have a very good chin. That was a fight that he was just cruising in against Peralta. All they had to do was not get finished, and he got knocked out in the first 10 seconds or so of the third round. So he can get blitzed. He can get overwhelmed if White decides to just put the throttle full steam ahead and go for it. But overall, Payon is the much better fighter. So I think Payon cruises to a decision probably in this fight unless White gets completely worn down. Then maybe Payon could get a stoppage. So my pick is Esteban Payon. Now, let's take it to the 155-pound division. We have Jorge Masvidal, who is 25-8 overall, taking on Pat Bam Bam Healy, who is 31-17 with 1 no contest. So, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Masvidal minus 190 to come back on Healy plus 150. And it did get some movement early on back and forth. I mean, Masvidal dropped actually below my opener, but right now, looking over 5 times, he's minus 210. So a little bit more support coming back in on him. And this is the type of fight, again, the sportsbooks are going to be fairly even on because both these guys get a ton of respect. I think both of these guys definitely have ways to win the fight. And both of these guys have been in with good competition and they continue to improve their overall game. So it should be an interesting fight. Definitely, but I think it's one that it's for Masvidal to win or lose here. Healy, the best part of his game, as we all know, it's no secret, is he's just a heck of a grinder. He's a tough guy. He just keeps on pushing the pace. He comes forward. In most cases, he's able to utilize his grappling skill and his outstanding wrestling to get the takedowns, look for some submissions, goes for ground and pound. He just controls you, and he never stops. He's just relentless. Another one of these guys that pushes an extreme high pace. But he's going to have a lot of problems here with Masvidal. Masvidal, as we've seen in the past, and it keeps on improving, actually, he's got very good takedown defense, and he's got good footwork. So I think Masvidal is going to be able to keep Healy at bay a little bit. He's going to be able to utilize his striking, which he's going to have a big advantage here striking. I mean, Masvidal is sort of a sniper on the feet, no doubt about it. I mean, the guy has accurate punches. He's very effective with his boxing. He's got tons of power, so he can really mark Healy up on the feet, I think. And again, he can stifle most of Healy's takedowns by sprawling and brawling. So Masvidal also has a little bit underrated offensive wrestling. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Masvidal ends up getting on top throughout the fight. I don't see it happening a lot because I'm sure he'll bounce back up and he knows what kind of advantage he's going to have on the feet, and he's going to try to utilize that. But still, Masvidal, a very complete fighter, and he just keeps on improving his overall game. So this is basically your typical striker versus grappler matchup. Now, a lot of times the grappler does seem to have a little bit of advantage because he's able to get the fight to the floor. But here again, that's going to be the whole key. I think that Masvidal is going to be able to control this fight, keep it upright, and then he is going to have a huge edge on the feet. So you got to go with it. I think that he's going to cruise at least to a decision here. I think he can basically replicate in a way what Bobby Green was able to do against Healy. Now Masvidal is a little bit a different fighter, of course, than Green was, but still, I think that's the blueprint he can follow. Just make life miserable for Healy, keep him off you, use your footwork, sprawl and brawl, and just mark him up. I think that it wouldn't be out of the question, no matter, even if Healy is a tough guy, like I said, that he could take punishment, no doubt about it. It's a very solid fighter. It wouldn't shock me if Masvidal does land that knockout blow and finish him as well. But more times than not, I think Masvidal wins by decision here, just outpoints him. So got to go with Masvidal.
Yeah, and this is one where I'm in 100% agreement. Both guys are about the same age. Masvidal 29, Healy 30. Both train out of really solid gyms. Masvidal is American Top Team. Healy's at the Sports Lab. And the biggest difference here is I think Masvidal just has all the counters to Healy's biggest strengths. Masvidal's fought at welterweight a couple times before, so I don't think Healy's size is going to present any big problems to him. Masvidal has insanely good takedown defense. You just saw in his last fight against Rustem Khabilov, he actually stuffed almost every single takedown that Khabilov sent his way, and Khabilov had just blitzed through everybody he'd fought up until then. So I think, if Masvidal can shut down Khabilov's takedowns, then Healy's are going to be no problem whatsoever. Although they do come at a different angle, and they're different types of takedowns, because Khabilov's are a little bit more explosive. Now, Masvidal is extremely technical on the feet. He keeps his hands high. He's sometimes patient to a fault, so he can get outworked, but I'm just not sure that Healy's the guy that could take advantage of that situation, just because Healy's striking is still pretty rudimentary. Healy does push forward and throw strikes, but and they're becoming less stiff and robotic, but they are still not that very powerful at all, so you don't really have to respect them too much. And they're pretty easy to avoid as well, because they're not coming in very quickly. But Masvidal is just a really solid. He works really nice low and body kicks. He mixes in knees whenever the fight's in close quarters. He actually obliterated KJ Noons with a knee when they fought in Strikeforce. And as Nick mentioned, he has pretty good offensive wrestling, although I'm not expecting him to showcase that this fight, because he should be able to just outwork and outstrike Healy on the feet. So I think this fight is going to be pretty similar to Healy's last fight against Bobby Green, although I don't see Masvidal fading in that third round like Green did, where he was, almost in survival mode a little bit, defending takedowns. So I think Masvidal just works over Healy. Healy is going to be game. He's got a great chin. He's huge for the division, but he needs to get the takedowns and to wear his opponent out to win, and I just don't see him being able to do that against Masvidal. So I see Masvidal winning a pretty one-sided decision. So moving on, we are getting a little bit closer to that main card. We have a returning UFC fighter, Thiago Alves, who is 24-8 overall, taking on Seth Baczynski, who is 18-8, and this is a welterweight contest. So Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened Alves minus 350 to come back on Pejic plus 250. Let me say this. I'm glad to see Pitbull back. I mean, Alves is an outstanding fighter. And now, if we get to see the version of the Thiago Alves that we've seen in the past, he's got an absolute very good chance of making a run towards that title. It's wide open right now, as we all know, the welterweight division. Hendricks is an outstanding champion. He's going to be a tough out, no doubt about it. But with GSP out of the picture, honestly, as we all know, it made the welterweight division very interesting with matchups, because there's several guys that match up relatively well together, and you could throw Thiago Alves right in that mix right away. But again, he's got to come back. We have to see what he's made of right now, because he has had a lot of time off. His last fight was back in March of 2012 against Martin Kampmann. So with the issues that he's had with his head, with the time off, it is a little bit scary, but still, I think, make no mistake about it, Thiago Alves is a very talented fighter, and he's just an absolute nightmare matchup for a guy like Seth Baczynski. Seth is a very good fighter. He definitely has a good skill set, no doubt about it. He's decent on the feet. He has a ton of heart. He's got great submissions, especially that guillotine choke, very nasty. So he's a well-rounded fighter, no doubt about it. And he's got the heart and the cardio to definitely go 3 strong rounds, and he makes things interesting for sure. He's going to have a little bit of a reach advantage, of course, over Alves, which is going to make things a little bit interesting. And again, for Alves being out that long and coming back, he's not getting a gimme fight at all. Seth is, like I said, no slouch, no joke at all. He's coming off an impressive win over Neil Magny, Seth, that is too. But before that, he did lose to Melanson, and he lost that fight by devastating knockout. And I think we're going to see kind of a flashback of that. Again, Thiago Alves, if he's even remotely close to the fighter that we saw before this time off, he should be able to, I think, to land the punches and probably finish Seth off in this fight. So I think Seth's going to struggle getting the takedowns on the feet. He's not really a matchup for Alves, although he is going to have that little reach advantage. And he could make things interesting, especially from the clinch. He throws some decent knees. And he's going to be game, but I think Alves is going to eventually find a spot, possibly put Seth out. If he doesn't put him out, I think it's going to be a clear-cut kind of a kickboxing style decision for him. I mean, he's going to outpoint him and he's going to bust him up. So I think Seth is going to have to hang on, and not, get put out in this fight either way. It should be a clear-cut decision for Thiago Alves. I think he's going to be successful in his return. At least I hope so, because like I said, I would like to see this guy continue and move up the ladder and just make things interesting. I hope he is the version that we are used to seeing and that he once was. So I got to pick Thiago Alves because I just think he's a nightmare matchup for Seth.
Yeah, I completely agree. Baczynski has had some issues against this type of fighter in the past, most notably Melanson, who's, despite Thiago Alves only being 5'9", Melanson was actually 5'8", and he lit up Baczynski in their fight. Alves, as long as he's the fighter of old, has brutal leg kicks, some of the best in the welterweight division. He has explosive knees. He throws flying knees, running knees, jumping knees, all kinds of crazy knees. And while he is 5'9" and a smaller type of fighter, he's been 5'9" his whole career. He's not like he just magically shrunk down. So he's used to fighting bigger, taller guys. So I don't think the size disadvantage will be too much of a problem here. He has this stalking, aggressive style that's just constantly pushing forward, looking for the big shots. He has a pretty good chin, but it has been tested. He actually got hurt in the Martin Kampmann fight in the first round against him, and also in the GSP fight ages ago. He got hurt a couple times. So, that is a bit of a concern, potentially, because, his chin isn't going to be better even though he hasn't fought in 2 years. Now, again, the other big question marks are, how is he going to perform after so much cage rust? Sometimes guys just don't come back the same. We saw this Wednesday night with Michael Bisping and Kyle Nook both coming in after extended layoffs, and they just they looked flat. So that is a little bit scary. And how's his weight cut going to go? The guy was just renowned for his terrible weight cuts and having problems making 170 pounds. So is that can still be a problem after he's been out of the cage for 2 years? Another good advantage that Alves has is he mixes in solid takedowns. It's something he really started to add to his game recently. So I'm sure that it's gotten even better in all this time off. He's been able to practice it a little bit. And in terms of Baczynski, 32 years old, trains out of Power MMA. And while he is 6 inches taller, he doesn't use his range that well. I really do think, as Nick mentioned, this could be a repeat of that Melanson fight. Baczynski does have pretty good power in his right hand. He lands it well. He's scored some knockouts with it in the past. And he's had big wins in his career. He actually finished Alex Garcia before he made his return to the UFC. And he finished Matt Browne, which is a really impressive considering the run that Matt Browne's been on. He has a very good ground game. I think if he can get Alves in a guillotine choke, this fight gets interesting because that was actually the last result that Alves had as a fighter was tapping out to a guillotine against Martin Kampmann in a fight that he was winning with about a minute left. I think Baczynski is vulnerable to single power shots and takedowns, and his striking defense is relatively poor and lacking, and he doesn't have a great chin. So, if Alves can get inside and land something heavy, I think Baczynski goes down. So my pick is Thiago Alves. Now this takes us to the feature preliminary bout. We have a lightweight matchup between two top 10 fighters in Rafael dos Anjos, who is 20-6, taking on Habib Nurmagomedov, who is 21-0. So Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Nurmagomedov minus 185. Dos Anjos I opened plus 145. And right now Nurmagomedov is minus 260. The comeback on Dos Anjos is plus 220. Well, this is a tough one, man, because I know that Habib has looked outstanding in all his fights. There's a lot of tremendous amount of hype behind him. Everybody turning down fights against this guy. Nobody wants to fight him. All that buzz surrounding him has affected people's brains a little bit. The guy is definitely a talented fighter. He's got tremendous grappling, tremendous wrestling abilities. He's got power on the feet, and he just continues to improve and get confidence. The scary thing is now he's had enough wins in the UFC, and he's had enough time in the UFC where he knows he belongs. He knows he's good. He knows he's going to be eventually in title contention, and this is a serious step towards that right here if he gets a W over a fighter like RDA. But Dos Anjos is going to be a hard test for him. We cannot look past him at all because technically Rafael Dos Anjos is a much better fighter, I think. He's got a better skill set on the feet. He's got a more variety of striking attack. Again, I said he's more technical on the feet as well. He's got nasty leg kicks. He's got better boxing overall. He could just throw a variety of attack where Nurmagomedov has more of his boxing style, a little bit wild, swinging, looping punches towards you a little bit, which are effective, and he does definitely have some power, and again, he's getting better, but still, RDA on the feet has a big advantage. On the ground, the pure jiu-jitsu edge goes to RDA as well. I mean, he's got decent jiu-jitsu. I don't think he's going to catch Habib in a sub, but it's possible. I mean, if Habib doesn't, if he doesn't fight carefully, he can definitely, if he makes one mistake, RDA is the type of fighter that can capitalize on something like that as well. But what it's going to come down to here ultimately is his takedown defense. Is Dos Anjos' takedown defense going to be enough to stifle Nurmagomedov's relentless type of grappling style that he does bring to the table as well? The guy pushes a serious pace. He's going to try to be all over RDA here in this spot. And I think that, as far as judges go, that could possibly sway the judges because Rafael Dos Anjos is going to have to kind of force him off a little bit, use his angles, use his footwork, and outstrike Nurmagomedov. And I think he's going to be capable and probably able to do that at times. My concern here, though, is it is going to be an extremely competitive fight. It's not going to be a walk in the park at all. So I know all the people that are currently laying that price have a lot of stock or have a lot of faith in Nurmagomedov. I think this is by far his toughest test to date. I mean, just look at Dos Anjos' recent wins. I mean, he's fought very solid competition. Pejic which a lot of people thought at that time was going to out-grapple and control RDA, which a lot of people were thinking Nurmagomedov's going to do here in this spot. He also has his recent win over Dunham, and his win over Cerrone was nothing but impressive. I mean, we all know how good Cerrone is, so I don't think we can count RDA out here in this spot. However, like I said, based on the momentum, based on his aggressive style, I'm going to slightly favor Nurmagomedov here. I think if it goes the cards, which I am expecting it to do, I think he is going to possibly get the decision win here. But, I mean, at the current price, it's dog or pass for sure in this situation here because I do think that RDA can win a decision as well. I think he's better, like I said, numerous times already, and so far here, he's a better, more technical fighter. He has more ways to win this fight. So, competitive fight. My official pick's going to be Nurmagomedov, but it's not going to be a very confident one because I do think RDA is a possible live dog.
Yeah, and I'm going to disagree here, actually. While I know that Nurmagomedov is a solid fighter, the thing that scares me a little bit is, he's just unpredictable sometimes. He's a bit wild. While he is extremely explosive, he can get inside and land some crazy strikes. He actually throws a really good uppercut that, as we've seen, Dos Anjos has had a bad history against an uppercut in his UFC debut against Jeremy Stevens. Nurmagomedov throws flying knees well, head kicks well, body kicks well, but he starts to slow down a little bit after the first round. Those don't come in nearly as quickly or as explosively. He is tenacious with takedown attempts. The guy, both these guys have a common opponent in Gleison Tibau, and while Tibau slightly outworked Dos Anjos in their fight, Nurmagomedov just kept Tibau on the defensive with, I think, about 25 failed takedown attempts and pressing him into the fence for 3 straight rounds to earn a decision. So neither fighter looked good against Tibau, but their strategies worked differently as well. Now, I think Nurmagomedov doesn't actually have that good of takedown ability. It's more that he's just keeps going at it. And that his takedowns are actually best when his opponents are being too aggressive. He can duck under a strike and get an easy one. And while his takedowns and everything else still has a lot of work to do, he's young, 25 years old, training at American Kickboxing Academy, and he's got a ton of room for growth. And when he does have his opponents on the ground, he throws some really good elbows from top position, most notably in the Thiago Tavares fight where he got a nasty finish there. And there is a bit of a concern here because both of these guys have actually been out of the cage for quite a while. So Dos Anjos, 29 years old, trains out of Evolve MMA. I think one of the biggest advantages here is he's going to be a southpaw, which I think could present some problems for Nurmagomedov. And he's got serious power in both hands, especially his right hand, despite being the southpaw. His right hook is nasty. He actually dropped Donald Cerrone with that, and he knocked out George Sotiropoulos with one punch with that. So the guy definitely has some power, which has developed throughout his career because he was not a great striker when he debuted in the UFC. His technique is clearly improving. He has great leg and body kicks. I think he mixes them up very well. If he really can go after Nurmagomedov's legs, he can slow him down big time. He has really good counter-striking as well. And if Nurmagomedov wades forward throwing wild strikes, I think that's going to set up for some really impressive counters here from Dos Anjos. And again, Dos Anjos' Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is off the charts good. He hasn't really shown it a ton in recent fights because he's been more prone to standing. But I think the guy has an incredible jiu-jitsu acumen, and if this fight goes to the ground, he could catch Nurmagomedov in something, or at least use it to give himself an advantage. The things to be concerned about with Dos Anjos are his chin is a bit of a question mark. He did get knocked out in his UFC debut, and Clay Guida did break his jaw in their fight, so that is a little scary because Nurmagomedov has some power, and he slows down a little bit and can take rounds off, like the third round against Cerrone, the end of the fight against Dunham. There are times where he should still be going really hard and he doesn't. But I think honestly, technique-wise, Dos Anjos is the better fighter, and as long as he can stay off of his back for 3 rounds, then he's got himself in a decent position here to pull off a huge upset. So I think this line is way off. I think the hype on Nurmagomedov is way too big just because people were turning down fights, and that raised his stock in people's eyes. And I'm going to pick Rafael Dos Anjos. Now let's move on to the first fight on the main card. We have a middleweight matchup between Brad Tavares, who is 12-2, taking on Yoel Romero, who is 7-1. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things?
My opener was Romero minus 150, the comeback on Tavares plus 110. And this line has had some movement because right now at the time of the recording, Tavares is minus 145, Romero plus 125. So the line flipped. And I got to say, I am a little bit surprised, but hats off to you guys that grabbed Tavares early on and, at the plus money, because this is definitely a very competitive fight, a pick'em type of fight, in my opinion. And Tavares could very easily be, and he kind of deserves to be the slight favorite in this fight. I just, according to odds making, a lot of times you got to kind of buy into what the people are believing and the public hype and everything. And Romero, of course, has been an extremely popular fighter. There's been a ton of buzz around him. He has lost a little bit of stock in his performance over Brunson. It wasn't the W he got, and Brunson's a little bit underrated, I think, in most people's eyes. He should be a little bit more respected. So that was a quality win for Romero, no doubt about it. But how he looked in that fight, I think, did drop his stock a little bit. And how Tavares has looked in his win over Larkin, and how he's been improving his overall game a little bit. So I do see why the line is where it is now. So again, hats off to those people that scooped up that plus money early on. I'm going to go with Tavares here as well as far as the official pick goes. I think it's kind of his fight to win or lose. Now, it's going to be competitive. This is by far not a confident lean because Romero keeps on improving his game. For me, my biggest problem with Romero a little while back was his cardio. I mean, the guy faded after the first round. It seemed like he was basically done, but he's definitely worked hard. I mean, with American Top Team, those guys have something great going right now, again, which I think is really neat to see. I mean, they've been a strong camp for a long time, but I think right now they really have hit their groove, and I think Romero is a big part of that as well. So he keeps on improving his overall game. He's got devastating knockout power, obviously, as we all know, on the feet. He's got tremendous wrestling overall, and he's just going to be a beast. I mean, the guy brings it every time. He's very aggressive, and he usually does enough damage to get people out of there. So he is a southpaw, as Wash mentioned that, so he's going to have that going for him a little bit to make things interesting for Tavares. But overall, Tavares is the more solid fighter. I think he's a more technical fighter. I think he's got good takedown defense. I think he's actually got better hands, better boxing, better kickboxing actually overall, in this spot as well. So he's more technical. He packs a punch himself. He's going to have a little bit of size as far as height goes over Romero as well. So he's going to have a tiny reach advantage. I don't think it's going to come into too much play. But that is another little edge that Tavares has in this fight. And again, I just think he's going to be the more technical fighter. So I think he's going to find his opportunities, find his spots and be able to put out enough offense that he's going to win this fight against Romero, possibly even stop him if Romero does get a little bit tired as the fight goes on. So this is going to be a barn burner. I could really see it go back and forth here. But I think Tavares, you got to give him the slight edge. Again, he's a more proven, he's a more tested fighter. He's the more dependable fighter in my eyes. So I'm going to lean with Tavares. I think he is going to work at least to outpoint. He's going to do enough work to outpoint Romero in this fight, if not possibly get a stoppage here.
Yeah, and I agree. I was completely on board the Yoel Romero hype train heading into that last fight, and it got derailed a little bit, even though he got a third-round knockout. That honestly went way more into the fact that Derek Brunson completely fell apart and gassed than Romero did anything good. I think Tavares is just a little bit better all around in terms of technique, while Romero is an elite athlete. He's 36 years old, trains out of American Top Team, Olympic silver medalist, all that stuff is known. But he just does things that few other people can do. I mean, he throws these crazy flying knees that, guys that are that big shouldn't be able to throw. He has just huge dynamic power that can come in from just about anywhere. And he's very explosive, especially considering his age. I mean, you don't expect a guy that old and at a middleweight to be able to do that kind of stuff. He has spinning attacks. I mean, it's impressive. But I think the surprising thing is I think he's focused so much on the other parts of his game that he's let some of his natural abilities go down a little bit. He actually has been taken down in his last 2 fights in the UFC by Ronnie Marquez and Brunson, and that's just shocking to me, although, he does scramble very well still. I mean, he's got those basic instincts just fine, and he can get back up, but I mean, he has been held down for a little bit in fights, and I think he relies too much on his athleticism, so once he starts to get tired, it gets really difficult for him, unless his opponent gasses, for him to pull off those big spots. So he's really only super dangerous early, despite the fact that he has scored 2 late knockouts in his last 2 fights, which is crazy. I think Romero's striking defense is below average. He fades in fights. His chin is not that good. I mean, he did get knocked out in Strikeforce, hasn't gotten knocked out in the UFC yet, but he got definitely put in some big trouble by Brunson in the last fight. And he does have really good killer instinct. When he has an opponent hurt, he goes for it and puts him away. But I think Tavares here, at 26 years old, I think that he just has some things that are going to give Romero some problems. He uses really good technique. He has a strong jab. His jab is one of his best attributes, and I think that that's going to give some serious problems to Romero, who relies on getting inside to land those huge shots. And I think he's going to keep Romero at bay. He's powerful, but not actually. He's not overly powerful. It's more technical, and he doesn't make a lot of mistakes on the feet. That's important. He works strong leg kicks, and he's very good at using his range with his footwork. So I really see him kind of putting on a clinic against Romero, and as long as he doesn't make a mistake, which he doesn't do often, I think he's in good shape here. And he's still improving considering he's only 26 years old and trains with Ray Sefo almost every day in the stand-up. He has a good clinch, but I think he needs to be careful there against Romero just because of Romero's background. And his chin is only above average. I mean, he did get in trouble there against Phil Baroni briefly, but I think that's the only person that's ever really hurt him. And his striking defense is only about average, but he relies more on movement and footwork rather than head movement and keeping his hands up. So I see Tavares just outpointing Romero over the course of 3 rounds, and if Romero fades too much, then I see Tavares potentially getting a late stoppage, although that's not that likely. So my pick is Brad Tavares, though. So moving on, we have another lightweight battle. This one features Donald Cerrone, who is 22-6 with 1 no contest, taking on Edson Barboza, who is 13-1. So Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Cerrone minus 140 to come back on Barboza, even money. Man, this was a difficult line to set because both these guys have a tremendous amount of respect from the betting community, no doubt about it. So close to a pick-em, I think, is about right for this fight. And at the time of the recording right now, it's been going back and forth. The line's been flipping all around. And right now it's actually minus 120 for Barboza at 5 dimes. But earlier today, it was the other way. It was minus 110, even minus 120 for Cerrone. So I think we're going to continue to see the line flip back and forth. There's going to be a ton of two-way action on this fight, which is good in this spot for the sportsbooks because I don't think you're going to see really, you can't give either one of these guys a clear edge. I mean, the more well-rounded fighter and the more solid fighter, in my opinion, is Cerrone. So I am going to pick Cerrone in what should be a very competitive fight. you know what you're getting with Cerrone. And Barboza, I mean, it is what it is with him. He's an outstanding striker. He's got great takedown defense. He's young. He's talented. He keeps on improving. He's training with a good camp, of course, with Edgar and crew always. So he's going to continue to improve his overall game, and he's getting that confidence. He knows he belongs again. He's had some solid wins in the UFC thus far, and he's looked nothing but impressive. But against Castillo, he was tagged, rocked, almost put out. Against Varner a few fights back, he was stopped and finished. Against a guy like Cerrone that has just as much finishing power as the two guys I just mentioned, if not more, has that killer instinct, has that toughness about him, and has the more well-rounded skill set because Cerrone has outstanding wrestling, and he's going to have the jiu-jitsu edge in his fight as well as far as pure submission game goes, and he just has that toughness. I mean, Cerrone's been rocked. He's been finished as well in fights, but I think his chin is a little bit better still. He's been a little bit more battle tested. He's fought the better quality competition overall. Both of these guys have been in there with definitely some good opponents, but Cerrone, you got to give the edge to him there as well. So to me, if Barboza can pull off this win, I'm going to gain that much more respect for him because Cerrone is no easy out at all, and I think he should be the slight favorite in this spot. And I am going to go, like I said, and pick him what should be a very competitive fight. I think if it hits the cards, Barboza will probably do enough on the feet because he is the more talented striker, the more versed striker to maybe win a decision. But, man, I honestly can't trust his chin at this point. I mean, like I said, with Castillo and Varner alone, getting rocked like that, getting finished like that, not a good sign for me. So I'm going to pick Cerrone based on what I just said. I think he should have the very slight edge. But, again, it's not a real confident pick because this is a true coin flip. Barboza is a very talented striker, nasty leg kicks, just his ability overall. He can land on Cerrone. It wouldn't shock me. I mean, he's got enough finishing power that he could possibly finish Cerrone too, even with all the toughness and what I just said about him as well. So not a confident pick, but I'm going to slightly lean towards Cerrone in this spot.
Yeah, and while I agree that both of these guys are extremely talented, this is probably the toughest fight for me to pick. And the main reason is just because both guys are so battle-tested, although Cerrone has faced better opposition throughout his career, I think, and both guys are such talented strikers, and both guys train at elite places. Cerrone, 31 years old, trains out of Jackson's. He uses really good forward pressure. He's not the fastest guy, but he has a really diverse attack. He throws great reactive knees, especially in that Evan Dunham fight. He has great high and low kicks. The high kick really came into play in his last fight, scoring that nasty first-round finish. And he has good punching power. He's hurt a lot of people, most notably Melvin Gillard when he got a huge knockout in their fight. And while he does have great submission ability, most of the time that he gets submissions, it's after he's hurt his opponent on the feet, and then he just follows him to the ground and chokes him out or something. Although he has a really good triangle choke, which he showcased in the Dunham fight, the Horodecki fight, throughout his career. So, I mean, the guy is extremely, extremely well-rounded. And I think takedowns are going to be really important in this fight because Cerrone is a better wrestler than Barboza, and Barboza has been taken down a little bit in the Jamie Varner fight. So that could come into play if Cerrone's getting into trouble on the feet. And something to be concerned about is Cerrone sometimes just is inconsistent. He just shows up and he's a head case and gets crushed. And sometimes he just gets that deer in the headlights type of fighting style, like against the Nate Diaz fight, where he just got lit up for 3 straight rounds. And that could happen here because Barboza has the potential to pull that type of style off. Looking at Barboza, 28 years old, trains out of New Jersey with the likes of Marlon Moraes and Frankie Edgar and all those guys. Honestly, he has the best leg kicks in the UFC. The guy's finished 3 fights by leg kicks already in his career. He has a very diverse attack. It's flashy. He can land all kinds of stuff. I mean, just imagine that spinning wheel kick, the knockout of the year that he had. He's unpredictable, and he has sneaky punching power that I think people aren't expecting just because his legs are so dangerous. He can hurt you on the feet, too, with his hands. The biggest concern here is, as good as he is offensively, his defense is not very good. He is pretty hittable on the feet. Jamie Varner just spammed that overhand right, and then it just hit Barboza enough that he was able to follow up and put him away. And I don't think his chin is good at all. He's had 2 fights now where he got in huge trouble in the first round. I mean, that Danny Castillo fight, that was borderline 10-7 in the first round, how bad he was getting smoked. before coming back and miraculously getting the win due to bad judging and not getting the draw. But that's a huge concern here, is that Barboza needs to go 3 rounds against one of the best strikers he's ever faced and not get clipped. So that is a huge concern. He needs to up his work rate for this fight and just go at Cerrone and just wear him down a little bit. So he needs to have a high pace. And I think that, again, I'm zero confidence in this actually happening, but I'm going to pick Edson Barboza. I think that just the fact that he is the better striker is going to come into play. And if he doesn't get knocked out, which could happen, I think Barboza is able to either get a finish himself or, get a decision. So moving on, we have the co-main event of the evening, former title challengers Miesha Tate, 13-5 overall, taking on Liz Carmouche, who is 8-4, and this is a women's bantamweight contest. So Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Tate minus 165 to come back on Carmouche plus 125, and at the time of the recording, it's over at 5 dimes, minus 210 for Tate, come back plus 175 for Carmouche. So a little bit interesting movement in this line early on as well, back and forth a little bit, but it did obviously climb up in Tate's favor here. More support coming in that way. Hard not to argue. I mean, Tate's performances have been tremendous. I mean, she's looked great in most cases, especially her fights against Ronda Rousey, obviously. I mean, she pushed Rousey to the limit, especially in that last fight, back and forth. So she gained a lot of respect, I think, in that spot, and I think she deserves it. I mean, she's been one of the most talented women fighters at 135 pounds for a while now, and she's going to have definitely some advantages over Carmouche in this fight. But to me, I think it's going to be a very competitive fight. I think that you got to give the edge to Miesha Tate in this fight, as far as maybe she's going to be a little bit more aggressive. She's going to push the pace at first. She definitely has a better, I think, pure submission game. I mean, her grappling is top notch. But Carmouche is not going to be an easy girl to control, and not an easy girl to take down, obviously, because Carmouche has outstanding wrestling. I think on the feet, I almost give the edge to Carmouche on the feet a little bit. I know she didn't look that great against Alexis Davis, but Alexis Davis has better striking than Miesha Tate. Make no mistake about that. So I think it's going to be competitive in all aspects of the game. But you got to give, again, Tate the slight edge, because I think she has more ways to win this fight. I could see Tate winning a close decision against Carmouche. I could see Tate possibly finishing Carmouche by sub. Carmouche has decent submission defense overall, but when she does face very talented grapplers, she can put herself in some spots, and you can't make a mistake with Tate on the ground. Tate will finish you. So that's kind of my lean. I think that Tate is going to possibly find a spot, finish Carmouche by submission, or, like I said, win a competitive decision. But again, it's not for me. I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I think it's not a very confident take in this spot, because I do think Carmouche is going to bounce back from her lackluster performance, to say the least, against Alexis Davis, and I think she's going to make this fight interesting enough that she could possibly pull it off as well. So this is, in my opinion, it's another one of these dog or pass situations. I wouldn't lay the juice on Tate personally in this spot, but I know a lot of people are. So I am going to pick Tate to get the nod, but again, got to be honest here, it's not going to be a confident one.
Yeah, and I'm a little more confident in Tate here. I just think that she's a little bit better than Liz Carmouche in just about every area other than just pure physical strength. I mean, in terms of strength, Carmouche is just a powerhouse. 30 years old, former Marine, trains at a Team Hurricane. Awesome. She's a good wrestler, and she is very physically imposing. Like, when she gets top position, it's pretty smothering, and she gets people in trouble. In her second UFC fight, I mean, she absolutely crushed her opponent, got top position, got in a mount, and just kept dropping pitter-patter punches basically until the fight got stopped. And that's pretty much what she does. She'll take a submission if it's there, but she's not that great in terms of punching power to get a finish, and doesn't really have good technique unless it's gift wrapped for a submission. Carmouche is just more of a physical specimen. Now, Tate, I definitely feel, has a better overall game. I think at 27 years old, she does have a little bit better wrestling. I think her conditioning's pretty good, although she does push such a high pace that sometimes she wears herself out, like in the Katzengano fight, where she won the first 2 rounds and then just didn't have enough left, and then got beat up a little bit. So that could come into play here, because Carmouche does have really good conditioning. I think Tate has really good submission ability, and she's pretty limited as a striker, but so is Carmouche. Neither of these girls are very good in the stand-up department, although I think that Tate throws with a little bit more bad intentions. Neither of them has hardly any technique, but I think Tate she could outwork Carmouche on the feet a little bit. And I think she has a very strong clinch, and she has pretty good scrambles on the ground. She can dive for submissions, she can take people's backs, she has pretty good transitions. So I actually do think Tate is a pretty overall solid, well-rounded fighter, and she has good ground and pound. The thing here, I think the worst thing that Tate has going for her is she has a really bad chin. She's been knocked out a couple times now, and I think that fortunately for her, Liz Carmouche doesn't have a whole lot of finishing power, so she should be able to wade forward without being too concerned. So I just see Tate outworking Carmouche, and unless she gasses, I think she wins a decision here, maybe gets a submission. Now this takes us to the main event of the evening. We have a heavyweight contest featuring Fabricio Werdum, 17-5 overall, taking on Travis Haba Browne, who is 16-1-1. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Browne minus 210, the comeback on Werdum, plus 160. This line has been out for a while, so the initial movement on the number actually dropped a little bit, and it became closer to, I believe 150, 160 for Browne, but at the time of the recording again now, it's all the way back up to where I opened it at minus 210 or so. So some more support coming in on Browne recently. So again, this is another spot where I know the sports books are going to get heavy action on both guys here. A good spot to be in because I think that it should be an interesting fight, to say the least. I mean, Werdum's been at the top of the heavyweight division for a long time, and we know what he excels at the most, and that's his grappling ability. I mean, Abu Dhabi grappling veteran, of course. I mean, he's been competing at the highest level in the jiu-jitsu world, and he's accomplished pretty much everything you can possibly accomplish. And the guy has definitely 6 submissions that have translated well into MMA. So one of the best ever grapplers in the heavyweight division in MMA period. So he's got that going for him for sure. And not to mention, I mean, he continues to improve his overall game. I mean, he has evolved as a fighter. His striking has gotten to the point where he can be effective with his striking as well. There's just a few question marks to answer for me on Werdum still. I mean, he always, I think, when he can't get the fight to the ground or he can't dictate the pace of the fight, he tends to start backpedaling. He tends to start slowing down as the fight goes on a little bit. And he lets himself kind of get outpointed and get beat by certain fighters. And I think that Browne kind of fits this mold and fits that blueprint as well. He's hard to take down. We all know Travis Browne, what he's made of. He's extremely big for the heavyweight division. I mean, he's tall, 6'7" if I'm not mistaken. So he's going to have a little bit of a reach advantage over Werdum in this spot. And his takedown defense, again, like I mentioned, it's very solid. I mean, the guy is very hard to take down. Usually he ends up in top control if the fight does go to the ground. He has decent jiu-jitsu in his own right, but make no mistake, you cannot compare Browne's jiu-jitsu to Werdum's. A completely different level, but Werdum has to get the fight to the floor and to be able to utilize that. On the feet, where I think Browne is going to have a big advantage. I know, like I said, Werdum could be definitely scary at times because he does have a little bit of power behind him. He's getting more confident in his stand-up game, but the significant edge on the feet, in my opinion, is going to be with Browne for sure. And I think he's going to be able to keep the fight standing. I mean, Browne, as we all know, he's finished fights recently. I mean, against very solid opponents. I personally counted him out against Josh Barnett. I didn't think the fight was going to end like that. I honestly thought Josh Barnett's fight IQ would be a little bit better in that spot. I didn't think he was going to try to clinch up against the cage and look for the takedown as he did and let Browne unload those nasty, nasty elbows. And that's what finished the fight, but he did that against Gonzaga as well. He came back in his win over Overeem. Browne was getting handled in the stand-up department, getting basically lit up for a while up against the cage and whatnot as well. But Overeem is a different fighter, of course, on the feet than a guy like Werdum. So that's really not going to come into play here. Overall, Browne has looked nasty on the feet. I mean, he mixes everything up so well. His kicking ability, I think, is what puts him ahead of most heavyweights. I mean, because he has that length to go along with it. He throws good knees, but his just kicking game could be devastating at times. So he mixes things up very well. I mean, I believe he did knock out Overeem. Well, he caught him at first, at least, with that front kick, and then got him with some punches overall too. So he has more ways to win this fight on the feet. He's definitely by far the better striker. And again, I think he's going to be able to utilize his striking skill and keep the fight standing. And as Werdum cannot get him down to the ground. I think he's going to start losing confidence as the fight goes on. And he's a tough guy. Werdum is definitely a hard guy to finish, no doubt about it. He's got a ton of heart. He's got a solid chin. The only guy to ever really finish Werdum on the feet was obviously Junior Dos Santos, and that was a while back. And Junior Dos Santos' UFC debut. So, and that was actually a different Werdum. I mean, he's not the same Werdum at all. And in fact, when he came into that fight, he looked out of shape. He didn't look like the same Werdum. So he's definitely a hard guy to stop. And Browne's going to have his hands full as far as that department goes. He's going to have to really put it on him. And I think he's going to have more success possibly in round 2, round 3 as the fight goes on, because like I said, Werdum tends to backpedal, tends to kind of let up a little bit as the fight goes on. I think Browne, even though he has had some spotty cardio issues in the past, I should mention that. His training definitely with the Jackson and crew over there has excelled his game. He's, I think, fixed most of those cardio issues as well. And his striking advantage is going to be enough to at least outpoint Werdum, but even possibly, with the accumulation of strikes, end it. I think he's going to tag Werdum enough times that he could possibly win this fight by KO as well. So I think it's going to be Browne's fight to win or lose. If he keeps off the ground, he should win this fight. So you got to go with Travis Browne in this spot.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you here, Nick. I think that both of these guys are extremely talented. This is the number 2 and number 3 guys in the UFC heavyweight division battling for that top contender spot. And obviously both of these guys are going to be great. But Werdum, 36 years old, trains out of Kings MMA, and I think those guys have had a huge positive influence on his career. When he started training with them, he was the best heavyweight submission fighter in the world, but he didn't have hardly any stand-up ability. But since training with them, he's really taken his stand-up to the next level. He obliterated Roy Nelson on the feet in his UFC debut and then knocked out Mike Russo in his second fight. So, I mean, the guy's stand-up has improved leaps and bounds to where he's actually a threat on the feet against most heavyweights on the roster. I'm not sure that's going to happen here against Travis Browne, but again, still, he's actually a solid stand-up fighter now. But I think his best attributes on the feet are his Muay Thai. He just mixes up kicks really well, low kicks on the ground, body kicks. On the inside, he can put his opponent in the Thai plum and land some devastating knees, although that's going to be a little tricky against Browne because Browne is such a big, tall guy. And I think he throws elbows really well when he gets inside. So I think Werdum's best plan of action on the feet is to get this into the clinch, as we saw in Browne's fight against Overeem. He got himself in some big trouble when Overeem got inside on him and was just landing those huge shots. So I think if Werdum can mix up the low kicks from the outside and then get inside and do that, he could have some definite success. He does prefer to move forward, and he has a little bit of trouble when his opponents put him on the defensive, make him fight from his back step. And I think he does have a good lead left hook as well. So he mixes up a lot of good striking techniques, considering how good of a striker he was when he first started in MMA. And on the ground, obviously, Werdum is just insane. The guy, in my opinion, is the best heavyweight submission fighter of all time. And he's proven it time and time again. One of the first guys to tap McGarrett in his last fight. Although, honestly, in his last fight, he looked a step slow. So considering how good he looked in his first 2 UFC fights, that's a little scary. Now, looking at Browne, 31 years old, trains out of Jackson's. He is very light on his feet for a heavyweight. Very dynamic striker for a heavyweight. Like, a lot of the things he does so good, you're going to hear me say for a heavyweight afterwards, because it's just so rare that a fighter has that type of skill set in the heavyweight division, especially coming in, about 250 pounds like he does. He throws some really unorthodox attacks. He finished Overeem basically with a front kick, just like Anderson Silva did, as a heavyweight, which is just crazy to me. He has big punching power. He had a Superman punch that just knocked Stefan Struve right out of the sky. And he has really good takedown defense and uses his elbows masterfully when he has his opponents in trouble. The guy has already now finished 2 straight opponents with elbows when they were in the clinch with their head hunched forward trying to take him down. He did it to Gonzaga, and most recently did Josh Barnett. Finished Barnett in like a minute and a half tops. I mean, that was unbelievable. The fact that he pulled that off against such a veteran, such a highly ranked guy and respected guy. And in terms of just the pure stand-up skills, I think he has a pretty good left jab and left hook. And cardio, while it's improving, it is potentially a concern. We really haven't seen his cardio tested since he's really moved out to Jackson's and been training at that high altitude. We can believe that it's gotten better, but we haven't seen it for sure because his fights that have gone to decision have not looked good. The Rob Browne fight was awful. Granted, that was in Denver, high elevation, but the Congo fight wasn't good either, and that was marred by, penalties and all kinds of stuff. That was an ugly fight, and that was a draw. So I am a little concerned if this fight gets out of the second round, especially being a 5-round fight. So this one could get ugly if it doesn't get finished. But I think that Browne just is a little younger, more diverse, and powerful and dynamic, and I think that that's going to come into play here, especially because Werdum looked so slow in his last fight. So I'm picking Travis Browne to get the stoppage here. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC on Fox 11. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out early Saturday around 11 a.m. Eastern Time, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information to keep you up to date on everything that has to do with the show. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.